So it's kind of like meditation in a way where you realize you are off the rails in terms of sticking to your creative practice. You haven't been sticking to it. You're off the path. But once you realize it, the idea is bring yourself back. Start focusing on the path. Start trying to stick to your schedule to ultimately achieve your creative goals. And I think that's definitely a healthier approach than berating yourself on one side for not sticking to said goal or being irresponsibly nonchalant on the other side with letting yourself off the hook when you don't stick to your goals. What's up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the only podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 262 of the Spun Today Podcast, and it is a free writing session episode. In this episode, I'll share my writing stats over the past few months. I'll also be sharing a dope writing/creative tip that I picked up along the way. I'll tell you a little bit about what I've been reading, and we'll share and reflect on a free writing piece of my own. Stick around for all that good stuff, but first, I want to tell you guys about a quick way, an easy way, a great and appreciated way that you can help support this podcast if you so choose. Your support means a ton. Aside from rating and reviewing this show wherever it is that you're listening to it right now, which really does help, here is another way that you can help support the podcast, and then we'll jump right into the episode. For my fellow writers and creatives out there, a really cool way you can help support this show is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the Pro Writing Aid banner. If you're a listener of the show, you know that I use Pro Writing Aid to pre-edit all of my writing before I put it out or before I ship it off to my editor, so that it is in as pristine condition as I can probably get it. Pro Writing Aid offers a great toolkit that helps you polish your work with easy-to-use grammar checks and the writing assistant that also looks into things like pacing improvements, typos, punctuations, and much more. Go to spuntoday.com/support, click on the banner for Pro Writing Aid, and check out their free option as well as their different tiers of paid options. spuntoday.com/support. My writing stats have been absolutely atrocious over the past few months. And although a part of me, like the bitch part of me, feels like I have a built-in excuse because of some family things that are health related that we're going through right now, I also beat myself up over it because there's so much room for improvement, right? When you're doing dog shit, regardless of the reason why, it's on you to find creative ways to do the work, to pursue the passion. And I know I'm not doing my all in that direction, so I definitely hold myself completely responsible for the atrocious writing stats that I'm going to share with you guys. And for anybody else going through things, I kind of see it through the lens of there's always people above, there's always people below. And you can apply that to anything, really. You know, if you're poor, there's always people that are poorer, and there's always people that are richer. If you're filthy rich, there's always people that are even more rich and people below you that are poor. If you're a hard worker, there are always people below you that are lazier, and there's always people above you that work even harder. So on and so forth, you get it. So I feel like on some level, even though I'm going through what I'm going through right now, there's people that have it worse and that might be putting forth more effort than I am when it comes to their, respective creative pursuits or whatever they hold dear, so on and so forth, as I definitely should be. So here are my writing stats for March 2024. I wrote 7 out of the 31 days of the month for a writing percentage of 22.6%. Then in April, my birthday month, shout out to my Aries listeners out there, April 2024, I wrote only 3 out of the 30 days of the month for a dismal writing percentage of just 10%. Then in May of 2024, I stepped it up a notch, but a very tiny, teeny, insignificant notch, and wrote 4 out of the 31 days of the month for a atrocious writing percentage of 12.9% of the month. And we are already now in June. So I'm reflecting on the goals I set for myself, the specific writing goals that I set for myself for the year. As I do, at the end of every year, I reflect on the writing goals, the podcasting goals that I set for myself the prior year, and I see what I achieved, what I didn't achieve, what I have to tweak. I'm doing a mid-year review of sorts of my own goals, and if I'm not mistaken, it was to at least complete the first draft of my second novel, the continuation to Frankl, which I'm nowhere near, and also complete the audiobook of the collection of short stories, Melted Cold, that I published last year, which I have also not begun. I've begun researching a few different ways. I think I'm going to go the ACX route, which is Amazon's platform for self-recording, and your book will be available on Audible, which is the largest audiobook platform. But I'm debating between self-recording, you just using my own voice, versus trying to leverage these new innovative AI tools that, for example, one company that I looked into, 11 Labs, they allow you to choose different voices to read text. So, for example, since Melted Cold is a collection of 8 different short stories, all fiction, but none of them have anything to do with each other, and some of them have multiple characters in it, although I know it obviously can be done and has been done from now all the way through the past history of audiobooks before this AI technology, where you have one voice actor, reading the roles and sometimes doing accents or just reading the book as they would at a book signing or reading or whatever. I feel that technology, and as long as it doesn't sound completely robotic, which some of them definitely do that I've looked into, but some of them sound fairly authentic, fairly real. I think being able to do something like that just adds a layer to the whole theater of the mind that you're trying to create for your reader as a writer. But I think especially so when you are creating an audiobook version. So I have begun looking into it, at least, which is obviously a necessary step, especially for me, who's anal about, figuring out the inner workings of things. And, I want to learn the business side of authoring, as I have, from self-publishing and editing and stuff like that, like from the ground up myself. But as time ticks away, I definitely see the need to begin executing on some of these thoughts and ideas and plans, if you will. And some things just off the top of my head that I could implement, that I have spoken about in the past, that I have implemented in the past in spurts, is specific writing times. Waking up an hour earlier, writing for an hour before I would normally get my day started, or tacking on an hour at nighttime and doing it that way, getting an hour less of sleep. Those are probably most viable options. Or another would be setting aside specific time slots throughout the week, in the middle of the day, or the middle of the afternoon, in the evening, whatever, after work, and treat it as in, a clock in, clock out type situation, which is definitely harder to juggle and pull off, with having kids and all those responsibilities and stuff like that. But I'm reminded of a post that I wrote about once in my first book, Make Way for You, Tips for Getting Out of Your Own Way, which sounds like I need to fucking reread myself. But I remember writing a post in there saying that everybody gets 24 hours. Everyone in the world, from the president to a 5-year-old that watches cartoons all day. It's the ultimate equalizer, right? Everybody gets the same exact amount of time every single day. So at some point it becomes a matter of time management or lack thereof. And I'm definitely lacking when it comes to that. So let's see how I pick it up for my next free writing session episode. And those folks are my writing stats for March, April, and May of 2024. The writing tip that I wanted to share with you guys, the Daily Stoic Emails by Ryan Holiday. I've spoken about Ryan Holiday in the past multiple times. I think in the most recent free writing session episode, I mentioned that I'm reading his book, The Daily Dad, which is essentially parenting tips and advice via the lens of Stoicism and Stoic philosophy, which I definitely recommend for any parents out there, not just dads, or anyone who's just interested in Stoicism and its practical applications, even if they're not a parent, because it does have some interesting anecdotal stories throughout it, aside from the advice giving, etc. But Ryan Holiday also has a newsletter called The Daily Stoic. And it's usually advice on how to live, how to be more kind and compassionate and living a more fulfilled life, and how Stoicism can help with those pursuits. This post in particular is related to creativity, and it's called It's a Practice. And I'll link to the actual post in the episode notes if anybody wants to check it out and read it for themselves. But I am going to read it here for you as well. And this one in particular, he sent out on April 30th, 2024. And he says, it may feel like you're not good at this Stoicism thing. You lost your temper yesterday. You relapsed on some bad habits. You did something that was unkind. You did something out of fear. Okay, few would confuse you with Cato. So, few confused anyone with Cato. Even in Rome, at that time, there was an expression, quote, we can't all be Catos, end quote. This isn't to excuse your mistakes or your less than virtuous behaviors. It's just to point out that you're thinking about it wrong. The great record producer Rick Rubin makes a helpful analogy in his book, The Creative Act. Just like you may say you're not a good Stoic, people might say, or worse, believe they're not creative. Quote, you're either engaging in the practice or you're not, he writes. You're not good at it. It's like saying, I'm not a good monk. You're either living as a monk or you're not, end quote. What he means is that creativity, philosophy, is not an end state. It's a process, a practice. It's the attempt, not the outcome that counts. It's an intention, not a disposition. So what, you fell short? Were you trying? Are you still trying? That's an important thing. Stoicism is something we do, or rather, it's something we are doing. Every single day, we're trying. Every single day, we are putting the time in, the effort in, the intention in. We won't always be successful. We won't always live up to our standards. But what counts is that we don't quit. What matters is that we trust the process, that we respect the practice. Reading that just made me feel completely better about having such a shit writing record over the past few months. Now let me stop. I intended to write, so it's all good. You obviously can't take it to that extreme either, because then at some point you're lying to yourself, right? No matter how much I intend to write or want to write, or want to plan to find time to write, in practical terms, I'm not writing as much as I need to be able to achieve the goals that I set for myself. But I definitely take from it the idea that creativity is a practice. It's not an end state. And I can't go extreme to the other side either of saying, oh, you haven't written 365 days out of the 365 days out of the year, you're a piece of shit, don't be a writer. You can't write anymore, you're not allowed, you're banned. That's not it either, obviously, right? And it's kind of like meditation in that way, where, you know, when you're doing a breath exercise and doing some form of guided meditation, for example, and the idea is focus on the breath, and you'll inevitably start wandering in your mind. Your mind will start wandering and thinking about things. And there'll come a point where you realize that your mind is wandering. And the idea is that's going to happen no matter what. But when that happens, bring your focus and attention back to your breath and just focus on your breath. In and out, focus on your breath. So it's kind of like meditation in a way where you realize you are off the rails in terms of sticking to your creative practice. You haven't been sticking to it. You're off the path. But once you realize it, the idea is bring yourself back. Start focusing on the path. Start trying to stick to your schedule to ultimately achieve your creative goals. And I think that's definitely a healthier approach than berating yourself on one side for not sticking to said goal, or being irresponsibly nonchalant on the other side with letting yourself off the hook when you don't stick to your goals. And speaking of meditation, you know something that I forgot to mention when I did a breakdown an episode or two ago of my experience doing the 5-borough bike tour this year. So if anybody's interested, definitely go back and listen to that episode. It was episode 260, Or check out the Spun Today YouTube page, and you'll find the specific clip from episode 260 pertaining to the 5-borough bike tour. But anyway, I had this epiphany while bike riding at the very end when I'm doing the much dreaded by everyone that does the 5-borough crossing the Verrazano Bridge, which is the very last real obstacle after biking 35 to 37 miles, 39 miles. You're on the last couple miles and you have to cross the Verrazano Bridge, which is a very, very long, not steep, but very long incline. I mentioned in that episode, I was proud of myself. I made it across without having to stop or without having to walk my bike. I stopped at the very tippy top, as some people do. Once the incline is done, pull over, stretch a little bit, then go down the decline. But I didn't have to walk the bike across, as I have done in the past. But one thing that I did do, and this is where the epiphany came in that I just mentioned, and I've never made this connection before ever in life. But while I was riding my bike, I was focusing on my breathing. Making sure I'm breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, in through my nose, out through my mouth. And as I'm doing it, I'm a quarter to a third, up the incline, or maybe close to halfway already up the incline. And I start thinking of meditation. I'm like, oh wait, this is like meditation. And it says, focus on your breath. And when you're walking through life and you going through obstacles and you're stressed out, focus on your breath. I never, and I feel fucking retarded even saying this out loud, but because it seems so obvious to me right now. But I never took that literally, if you will, until that moment on my bike when I'm stressed out. I'm like, fuck, am I gonna make it? Am I gonna have to walk the bike? Am I gonna make it all the way up? And then I started telling myself, focus on the breath. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus on the breath. It was like the physical manifestation of, your mind wandering. You thinking about your legs and your quads are burning, you're tired, you're breathing heavy. That's the physical manifestation of your mind wandering. But then you focus on your breath. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And I started doing that, and before I knew it, I was at the peak. And I was like, oh shit, fucking meditation worked in a practical sense. I don't know. I completely forgot to share that with you guys, and I thought it was funny that I never made that connection before, which seems so obvious to me now. But yeah, that is the writing tip that I wanted to share with you fine folks. Again, it's from the daily Stoic emails from Ryan Holiday. You can sign up for them absolutely for free. I'll link to it in the episode notes if you guys want to check out the specific post that I shared with you guys today, which is again titled, It's a Practice. What I've been reading. I finished reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. That's the one I'm going to break down for you guys today, or at least share some takeaways that resonated with me. And I had to go back to breaking down and sharing, which I don't think I did. I have to double check if I did. I don't think I did. Maybe for the next free writing session episode. I also read The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. And honestly, after reading those two important reads, I feel they're definitely on the more darker, morbid side of my personality. I definitely need to read something lighter or something just in a different vein, which I have Charlemagne's new book on deck, which is Get Honest or Die Lying. But I digress. I think books like this are important in enriching your soul, kind of, and especially for me personally, it's kind of a primer for how to deal with tragedy when it happens, which none of us can be fully ready for or even know how we're going to react to it. But when tragic situations happen or the inevitable loss of a loved one, I feel like these types of reads help me be in a better place to be able to process that type of emotional impact, if you will. But here is the official synopsis of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Viktor E. Frankl was a medical doctor and a psychiatric. Viktor E. Frankl was a medical doctor at a psychiatric hospital in 1492 when he became a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps in World War II. In 1946, he published this book about his camp experiences and a method of psychotherapy he developed. 45 years later, it was still named one of the most influential books in the United States. Part 1 describes his 3 years in 4 Nazi concentration camps, which took the lives of his wife, father, mother, and brother. He closely observed inmates' reactions to their situation, as well as how survivors came to terms with their liberation. In part 2, introducing logotherapy, is an academic discussion of the psychological reactions experienced by all inmates to one degree or another. It solidified Frankl's early theory that humanity's primary motivational force is finding meaning in one's life. As of 2022, this book has sold 16 million copies and been published in 52 languages. Shout out to Viktor and those stats there. And I'll read to you two blurbs that were submitted. The first one is from Anderson Cooper. See what I did there? He says, "This is a book I reread a lot. It gives me hope. It gives me a sense of strength." Someone else posted, "As relevant today as it was when it was first published. Man's Search for Meaning is a book for finding strength and purpose in times of great despair." And here are a few of the takeaways that I want to share with you fine folks, which is first just expounding a little bit more on the official synopsis and just who Viktor E. Frankl was. He was an Austrian neurologist, psychologist, philosopher, and Holocaust survivor who founded logotherapy, a school of psychotherapy that describes a search for a life's meaning as the central human motivational force, which is interesting. I think we can all agree to that to some degree or another. I know I certainly can, just in the general wondering of what is the meaning of life? Is there a meaning of life? What's my purpose? What is the contribution that I can make while I'm here in the world? So the synopsis says in part 2, it definitely has some dense academic areas where he connects his story of his experiences being in Nazi concentration camps and also what he observed from his fellow inmates and how they reacted to specific situations. And he connects that to logotherapy and makes other psychiatric applications in an attempt to what I can only describe as trying to retroactively make sense of something that you really can't make sense of. You know, one of the greatest in scope humanitarian crises of modern history. And it's filled with footnotes to studies and sources, etc. So it could get, dense in that way in some areas, but it definitely doesn't feel like you're, reading a textbook throughout the whole thing. One definitely poignant note that I think I shared last time while I was still, reading the book, but I'll reshare here is from one of the sections called Experiences in a Concentration Camp. He says that an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. And that just rings true to me and sadly makes sense. Kind of feels like a balanced equation. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Because it wouldn't make sense to act normal during an abnormal situation, right? Something's off there. That balance is off kilt. In another section, he says that, and in the story, by the way, people know that he's a psychiatrist and a doctor, and a lot of his fellow inmates come to him for advice or help or some, hope of reprieve, I would imagine. And he says that someone looks down on each of us during difficult hours, whether it's a friend, a wife, somebody alive or dead, or God, and he would not expect us to disappoint him. He would hope to find us suffering proudly, not miserably, and knowing how to die. And that there reminded me of moments that you read about or that you've seen in movies, or if you've experienced a loved one close to you, literally on their deathbed or close to it, and how they give off this sense of strength. And I wonder how much of that is in this vein of quote unquote knowing how to die, of putting on a strong face for the loved ones around you so that they don't see or experience that side of you suffering. And it also reminded me of Nipsey Hussle's murder when he was killed by Eric Holder Jr., who, according to eyewitnesses that were there, Eric Holder, for those of you who don't know, approached Nipsey Hussle in the strip mall parking lot of the Marathon clothing store in LA that Nipsey owned, and they were part of the same gang, maybe not the same specific set. I don't know the details there, but Nipsey allegedly said that there's some paperwork floating around of this Eric Holder character, being a snitch, which is when you're part of that world, it's like a scarlet letter. It's the worst thing. And apparently that is what pushed Eric Holder over the edge. 10 minutes later, he comes back, guns down Nipsey Hussle, saying that it's not true. And according to the eyewitnesses there, Nipsey told him, this is what I heard. You need to take care of that. You need to figure out if that's true, if that's not true. This is what I heard, prove your innocence, essentially. But according to witnesses there, when Eric Holder shot him literally 10 times before Nipsey died, he looked up at him and told him, you got me. You got me. In that situation in the sense of like that quote at the end of Viktor Frankl's writing here where he says, knowing how to die, know how to die, kind of reminded me of that. Nipsey within his, violent gang-ridden world knew how to die in a sense, in honoring what that was, as tragic as it was, as nonsensical as it was. He literally lived and died by those rules of that world that he was a part of. And in that moment, knew how to die. In this other section, Viktor Frankl, writes that there are two races of men in this world, the decent man and the indecent man, and both are found everywhere. They penetrate into all groups of society. No group consists entirely of decent or indecent people. So you occasionally found a decent fellow among the camp guards. Then he goes on to say that life in a concentration camp tore open the human soul and exposed its depths. Is it surprising that in those depths, we again found human qualities which were a mixture of good and evil? And that's crazy to have that level of objectivity, to be able to see past what's happening to you and your loved ones. Again, remember, this is a guy who lost his wife, his mom and dad, his brother, to the hands of these fucking Nazis, to the pure evil that they were a part of. But to be able to objectively say, amongst the guards, there were some decent ones. Now, how skewed his, that spectrum of decent versus indecent was within that world, who knows? Is a decent one just one that, kicks you while you're down 7 times instead of 10 times? Does that equal decent? I don't know, but I just thought that level of objectivity was crazy. But you do, just from a straight literary point of view, appreciate the way that line was written, where he says that life in a concentration camp tore open the human soul and exposed its depths. And is it surprising that in those depths, we again found human qualities which were a mixture of good and evil? That's some resonant writing right there. And again, ties to an idea that I feel like a broken record, but I always mention it, how there's a spectrum of people within everything. He breaks them down here in terms of decent and indecent, and there's a full spectrum in between that. But you can apply that same spectrum in characteristics of folks in all environments and within all things, in my opinion. This other bit of advice he gave someone that was mourning the death of a wife, and he says that this guy came to him, his wife had died or is in the process of dying, and he didn't know how to cope and deal with it, or how he's going to be able to go on. And he said that he asked the guy to envision it the other way around. What would his wife do if he was the one dying and she was the one that was going to stay alone without him? And the guy, said that, she wouldn't be able to bear it. She would be completely devastated. And he gave him that perspective shift and said that such is the meaning of sacrifice. You're taking that potential pain away from her and putting it onto yourself, in the fact that she's the one passing away, but won't have to deal with that grief and pain of you passing away. and instead you are feeling something that she will never have to feel. And he says that type of thought process or perspective shift, if you will, in some way, the suffering itself ceases to be suffering at the moment that the suffering itself finds meaning. So if that person that he gave that advice to was able to internalize that and say this suffering has that meaning, that specific meaning of my wife not having to feel the pain that I feel, then that will alleviate the suffering that person feels to a more bearable level. And I thought that was definitely interesting. He also quoted the odds of surviving in a concentration camp based on data that I believe he cited as well, but that it was survivors only 1 in 28 individuals. So out of 28 individuals, every 28 individuals that were within a concentration camp, 27 died and only 1 survived. That's just fucking astounding. And then he ends the book with this, spoiler alert, because literally the last couple lines to close out the book, but definitely resonated. And he says that the world is in a bad state, but everything will become still worse unless each of us does his best. Let us be alert in a twofold sense. Since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of. And since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. And that, folks, was my little recap and review of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. If you're interested in it, I will link to it in the episode notes for you guys to check out. The free writing piece that I'm going to share with you fine folks today is titled Potentiality. And if you guys enjoy this post, you can check out it and many more at spuntoday.com/free writing. And or you can check out my book, Make Way for You, Tips for Getting Out of Your Own Way, which is chock full of all these types of motivational / inspirational / fire under your ass and give you a kick in the butt type of style of writing. In this particular post that I'm sharing with you guys today, I actually previously shared a few years ago, back on episode 158 of the podcast in July of 2020. So it was almost 4 years ago. And I was going through my writing to figure out which piece I was going to share with you guys this time around. And although I have shared this one before, I usually share a fresh piece that I haven't shared in the past. It kind of felt fitting to this episode, and I thought it might be interesting to see how and if my thoughts on it have changed since sharing it with you folks last time. So again, it's called Potentiality, and I will link to it in the episode notes for anyone who's interested. And I wrote that if everything exists in potentiality, then anything and everything is quite literally possible. There are no impenetrable barriers, no obstacles that can't be overcome. Better still, there are no obstacles. That sounds very Matrixy. I must have been watching one of the movies around that time. Then I go on to say deterrence and distractions meant to knock us off our game. But why? What's the root cause of it all? Why does there seem to be an incentive to stifle? Who or what doesn't accomplish when we do? I see. So I'm saying in that part right there specifically, what's the root cause of it? Why does there seem to be an incentive to stifle? Meaning when we get knocked off our game or distracted and kind of anthropomorphizing some sort of entity that gains or loses in contrast to our gains or losses, right? So if we lose, they win, or if we win, they lose. And hence that being their incentive to stifle us and our growth and hopes and dreams and aspirations so that they can achieve their hopes and dreams and aspirations. Then I go on to write, have they or it really achieved a method of being able to reach over and affect us? And if so, how can we harness that ability and channel it towards turning potentiality into reality? So in other words, I'm thinking of this now, reading it as through the lens of different dimensions. For example, how we live in a 3D dimension, right? If we draw stick figures, they're in a 2D dimension. our shadows are, I think, considered 2D, right? Yeah, they're flat. And much how we are aware of our shadows, but our shadows are not aware of us. We are aware of a stick figure drawing, but the stick figure drawing is not aware of us. Similarly, if you go to a fourth dimension or a fifth dimension, we could be their shadows, for example, where we live and operate as if, we're at the top of that food chain. But what if that's not the case? And food chain is wrong terminology there, but in that chain of dimensions, we're in 3D, they're in 4D or above. Maybe we're projections of their shadows. So we're not aware of them, but they're aware of us. We can't see them, but they can see us. And that's how they're able to fuck with us and stifle our growth. But what I would say to that now, looking at it that way, is if we're connected, why is it like a converse relationship? Why is it not that our shadows do what we want them to do, right? Well, I guess it still makes sense. What if our shadows have a world of their own and they're like, I don't want to walk that way, I want to walk this way. But we're forcing them to do what we want them to do. Similarly, maybe that's, we have a mind of our own, but they're controlling us. I guess it makes sense in that way. But the point of it is, how can we harness that ability to reach over into these different, I call it potentiality there, but I can see it now through the lens of, again, dimensions. How can we reach into a different dimension and turn that into reality? So how can we reach into a potential future and make that potential future a reality? Then I go on to write, we should come to the realization that we truly are our own worst enemy, and we do it to ourselves. I think that's a bit of a cliche line right there. We'll say we'd do anything for it, except this, and this. Come on, man. Be about it. That sounds so corny right now. Reach into potentiality and grab a slice of your realized vision. I like the idea of reaching into potentiality. The grabbing a slice of your realized vision, I'm not a huge fan of right now, but I definitely like that idea of reaching into potentiality. Reach, even if it's proverbially, right? Reaching into potentiality. Do what you can do to make the reality that you want, that you're envisioning, to make it into reality. The goal, the want, the need, the writing more, in my case, the meeting of the completion of the first draft of the continuation second novel of Frankl, the completion of the Melted Cold audiobook. Make that potential reality an actual reality. Realize that vision. By what? By actually taking steps in the direction of those goals and having much, much, much more consistency in my practices. And I wrote that post, the actual physical writing of that post, which again, my free writing for the most part is pen to paper in my notebooks. And some of the ones that I like, I post on my website, which again is spuntoday.com/free writing. But the actual physical writing of this piece was written on Tuesday, August 25th, 2015 at 12 a.m. I wasn't sleeping much back then either. The title for the post again is Potentiality, and I will link to it in the episode notes for you fine folks to check out. And that was episode 262 of the Spun Today Podcast. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I appreciate each and every one of you that do so. And even those of you that don't do so, because you exist in the potentiality of future listeners. See what I did there? All right, folks. Thanks again for taking the time to listen. I really do appreciate it. And I wanted to share with you, fine folks, a few ways you can help support this podcast if you so choose. Check out my short stories or some of my free writing on my website, spuntoday.com. Listen to all the other types of episodes that I put out here on the Spun Today Podcast, whether they are breakdowns of movies or TV shows, current events thing that's going on, something in my life that's going on, a deep dive interview that I've done with fellow creatives or entrepreneurs or teachers, as I have in the past. And let me know what you think. Rate and review on whatever platform you are listening to this on right now. Just takes a few clicks. And here are a few more ways that you can help support the show if you so choose. And I'll check you guys out next time. Peace. What's up, folks? Tony here. I hope you're enjoying the Spun Today podcast as much as I enjoy producing it for you. Here are a few ways you can help support the show. For my fellow writers and creatives out there, a really cool way you can help support the show is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the Pro Writing Aid banner. If you're a listener of the show, you know that I use Pro Writing Aid to pre-edit all of my writing before I put it out or before I ship it off to my editor so that it is in as pristine condition as I can probably get it. Pro Writing Aid offers a great toolkit that helps you polish your work with easy-to-use grammar checks and a writing assistant that also looks into things like pacing improvements, typos, punctuations, and much more. Go to spuntoday.com/support, click on the banner for Pro Writing Aid, and check out their free option as well as their different tiers of paid options. spuntoday.com/support. A great way for my fellow writers and creatives out there to help support this show is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the Mock-Up Shots banner. When I first started writing and putting out content, I wanted to think of creative ways to help market my books. So I would take my own pictures, place the books in different places, take it to the beach with me, put it out in the snow, and I'd wind up with a couple good usable images and a bunch more mediocre ones. And also, in the case of the snow example, a completely soggy book. Then I found Mock-Up Shots. In one click, Mock-Up Shots turns your book cover into thousands of images, videos, graphics, and more. If you follow me on social, it's what I use to promote my books. You can check them out on Instagram @SpunToday to take a look at the professional creative quality of what Mock-Up Shots has to offer. And now for my listeners, you can get unlimited lifetime access to the largest instant book mock-up archive for 50% off. That's right, that's 50% off. And you can use it for any books that you currently have available or any books that you will write in the future. I highly recommend it. It's a great marketing tool. Go to spuntoday.com/support and click on the banner for Mock-Up Shots to claim your 50% off discount. You can also support by checking out my writing. Go to spuntoday.com/free writing. Here, you'll find a collection of freely written thoughts, which is intended to be a cathartic, meditative practice for myself, but also winds up doubling up as motivation and inspiration for myself and others. You can also go to spuntoday.com/short stories to check out my latest short stories, and also listen to the free audiobook versions of those stories. You can also support my writing by going to spuntoday.com/books and check out what I have available for sale. Currently available is Make Way for You, which is a collection of tips for getting out of your own way. It's a great read for my fellow writers or creatives out there. Also available is Frankl, which is my debut time travel novel. And last but certainly not least, Melted Cold, which is a collection of short stories. Each of the books are available in all digital formats for your Kindle or iBook or any other e-reader, as well as paperback and hardcover options. Again, go to spuntoday.com/books, and I'd love to hear what you chose to check out, as well as your thoughts after reading. spuntoday.com/books. If you're a fellow creative, a cool way that you can help support the Spun Today podcast and actually be part of the podcast is by filling out my 5-question questionnaire located at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Here you'll find 5 open questions related to your craft, your art, what inspires you to create, what type of unrelated hobbies you're into, and what motivates you to get your work done. You can choose to remain anonymous or plug your website and your work. And once you submit your questionnaire, I read your responses on a future episode of the Spun Today podcast. It's completely free at no cost to you. And what I like to say about it is that if your responses could potentially spark inspiration in someone else, why not share that? spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you, Grayson.
I love you, Daddy.